Sometimes the difference between life and death is a little girl nobody bothered to see. The ballroom smelled like polished marble, expensive perfume, and champagne that cost more than Maya Brooks' mother earned in a month. Crystal chandeliers glowed above the crowd like floating stars while soft violin music drifted through the $20 million hotel overlooking downtown Chicago. Maya adjusted the sleeves of her oversized catering uniform and tightened her grip on the silver tray, trembling in her hands. She hated carrying drinks during rich people events. The guests rarely looked at her face. They only looked at whether their glasses were full. Table 12 needs refills, her mother whispered while rushing past with a stack of folded napkins. Grace Brooks looked exhausted beneath the hotel lighting. 12-hour hospital shifts had carved faint shadows beneath her eyes, but she still managed a tired smile for her daughter. "Stay close to me tonight, okay?" Maya nodded. "I will." At 13 years old, Maya had already learned how invisible people like them could become inside places built for billionaires. The men in black tuxedos laughed too loudly. Women in diamond necklaces talked about private islands and stock markets while barely touching the tiny meals balanced on gold-trimmed plates. Somewhere near the center of the ballroom, cameras suddenly erupted in flashes. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Richard Whitmore had arrived. Even Maya knew that name. Everybody did. Billionaire investor. Owner of Whitmore Technologies. One of the richest men in America. Some people called him brilliant. Others called him cold enough to freeze a room just by walking into it. Maya finally spotted him moving through the crowd surrounded by security guards and business executives. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered, silver streaks touching the dark hair near his temples. His expensive black suit looked perfectly fitted, but his expression looked tired. Not weak, just heavy somehow, like carrying invisible weight. "That's him," one waiter whispered nearby. "Worth almost $11 billion. Another server muttered quietly, "People like him don't even know people like us exist." Maya glanced back toward Richard Whitmore just as he stopped near the stage beside a woman in an emerald green dress. Evelyn Cross. Maya recognized her from magazine covers. Whitmore's financial advisor. Elegant. Sharp. Always standing half a step behind him like a shadow made of silk and diamonds. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer called into the microphone. "Tonight marks a historic partnership for the future of medical innovation." Applause rolled across the ballroom. Maya moved carefully between tables, balancing glasses filled with sparkling champagne. The cold metal tray pressed against her palms while snippets of conversation floated around her like smoke. Money, investments, luxury cars, vacation homes. It all sounded unreal. Then Maya smelled something strange. Her footsteps slowed. Bitter, sharp, almost hidden beneath the sweetness of expensive champagne. Her mother worked hospital emergency rooms long enough to teach Maya certain things about dangerous chemicals and warning signs. "If you ever smell bitter almonds where you shouldn't," Grace once told her quietly, "pay attention." Maya's eyes drifted toward Richard Whitmore again. Evelyn Cross had just lifted a crystal bottle beside him, pouring fresh champagne into his glass, while photographers snapped pictures nearby. Nobody noticed her hand hesitate for half a second. Nobody except Maya. The strange smell drifted through the air again. Bitter almonds. Maya's heartbeat stumbled hard against her ribs. Richard Whitmore raised the champagne flute toward his lips while the crowd applauded around him. And suddenly Maya realized she was the only person in the entire ballroom who understood something was terribly wrong. Maya did not remember dropping the tray. 1 second her fingers were gripping the cold silver edge, and the next the ballroom exploded with the sound of crystal shattering across polished marble floors. Heads turned instantly. Conversations died mid-sentence. Richard Whitmore froze with the champagne glass inches from his mouth, while Maya pushed through the crowd before fear could stop her. "Do not drink that," she shouted again, louder this time. Her voice cracked through the ballroom like breaking ice. For a moment, nobody moved. Then security reacted all at once. A large man in a dark suit grabbed Maya gently but firmly by the arm before she could get closer to the stage. "Easy there, kid," he muttered. "You cannot run at people like that." Heat flooded Maya's face as hundreds of wealthy strangers stared at her. She suddenly became painfully aware of her scuffed black shoes and oversized uniform sleeves. Someone near the front laughed quietly. Another guest whispered, "Whose child is that?" Richard Whitmore slowly lowered the glass in his hand. His sharp, gray eyes locked onto Maya with an expression that was impossible to read. Not anger exactly. More like calculation. The kind of look people used when deciding whether something mattered. Beside him, Evelyn Cross recovered first. "This is inappropriate," she said smoothly, stepping forward with controlled calm. "Remove her from the ballroom." Her voice sounded polished, almost gentle, but something about it made Maya's stomach tighten harder. "No," Maya blurted out. "Please. I smelled something." A few guests exchanged amused glances. One older businessman chuckled into his drink. "She smelled something," he repeated sarcastically. Maya's mother appeared through the crowd a second later, horror spreading across her exhausted face. "Maya," Grace whispered breathlessly. "What are you doing?" "Mom, I think somebody put something in his drink." The sentence landed heavily in the silence. Richard Whitmore still had not looked away from Maya. "And what exactly makes you think that?" he finally asked. His voice was low and calm, carrying easily through the ballroom despite the quiet. Maya swallowed hard. Up close, he seemed even more intimidating than he had from across the room. Not because he was loud, because he was not. "The smell," she answered softly. "Like bitter almonds." Something flickered across Richard's expression. Tiny, almost invisible. But Maya saw it. Evelyn Cross gave a small laugh that did not reach her eyes. "Mr. Whitmore, with all respect, this child clearly does not understand what she is talking about. The catering staff uses almond flavoring in several desserts tonight." Maya shook her head immediately. "No, it was coming from the glass." "Enough," Evelyn said firmly. "Security." But Richard lifted one finger slightly, stopping everyone. The room obeyed instantly. Maya noticed that. One gesture from him and millionaires, servers, and guards all froze in place. "You seem very certain," Richard said. Maya looked at the champagne flute still resting in his hand. Tiny bubbles climbed lazily through the pale gold liquid beneath the ballroom lights. Then she noticed something else. A faint silver shimmer near the rim of the glass. So faint it almost disappeared when he tilted it. Her pulse skipped. "Look at the top," she whispered. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. He turned the glass toward the chandelier light overhead. Around the ballroom, people leaned closer. Maya could hear her own heartbeat now. Slow, heavy, waiting. Then Richard Whitmore quietly spoke 4 words that changed the atmosphere of the entire room. "Get my doctor. Now." The ballroom no longer sounded like a celebration. The violin music had stopped somewhere in the confusion, leaving only whispers and the faint clink of nervous hands setting glasses onto tables. Maya stood beside her mother near the edge of the crowd, while Richard Whitmore remained perfectly still beneath the chandelier lights, the untouched champagne flute resting in his hand like something dangerous. A man in a navy suit hurried across the marble floor carrying a silver medical case. Richard's private physician. The crowd parted immediately for him. "Sir?" the doctor asked quietly. Richard handed him the glass without taking his eyes off Maya. "Test it." Evelyn Cross crossed her arms smoothly. "Richard, this is becoming unnecessary. We are delaying an announcement in front of investors because of a frightened child." "Test it anyway," Richard replied calmly. Something in his tone shut the room down harder than shouting ever could. The doctor opened the silver case on a nearby cocktail table. Maya watched him remove a small electronic scanner no larger than a smartphone. Its blue screen glowed softly beneath the ballroom lighting while he dipped a testing strip into the champagne. 10 seconds passed. Then 15. Maya could hear someone coughing near the back of the room. A waiter accidentally dropped a fork somewhere behind her. Tiny sounds suddenly felt enormous inside the silence. The scanner beeped once. The doctor frowned. Then he checked the screen again more carefully. "Sir," he said slowly, "there is an abnormal chemical reading present." A ripple moved through the ballroom like cold wind. Richard's face did not change. "Define abnormal." The doctor hesitated. "Potentially toxic." Several guests gasped quietly. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Maya felt her mother's hand grip her shoulder tightly. Grace Brooks looked pale now. "Maya," she whispered under her breath. "What did you smell?" "I do not know," Maya admitted softly. "But it was wrong." Evelyn Cross stepped forward instantly. "This is ridiculous. Faulty readings happen all the time at crowded events. Alcohol contamination, cleaning chemicals, catering products." But for the first time that night, Her voice sounded slightly strained around the edges. Richard noticed it too. Maya could tell. His sharp gray eyes shifted toward Evelyn with slow precision. "Interesting," he said quietly. "You seem eager to explain this." Evelyn's expression tightened for only a fraction of a second before smoothing again. "Because your reputation matters, Richard." Headlines spread fast. The doctor looked uncomfortable now. "Sir, I strongly advise against consuming anything until a full laboratory analysis is completed." Richard handed the glass back without a word. Then he turned toward Maya. Cameras still surrounded them, but nobody seemed interested in business deals anymore. Every eye in the ballroom rested on the 13-year-old girl standing beside the catering tables. "What is your name?" Richard asked. Maya swallowed carefully. "Maya Brooks." "How did you notice something trained professionals missed?" She glanced at her mother. Grace gave the smallest nod. "My mom works emergency rooms," Maya answered. "She taught me to pay attention to smells, especially the ones that do not belong." Richard looked at Grace then, really looked at her for the first time all night. Her tired shoes, the faint cracks in her hands from years of hospital disinfectant, the exhaustion hidden behind professionalism. "You are a nurse?" he asked. "Patient transport and overnight support staff," Grace corrected gently. "Not a nurse." Something unreadable flickered behind Richard's eyes again. Respect maybe, or guilt. Before he could speak further, a sudden movement near the ballroom entrance pulled everyone's attention away. One of Richard's security officers was speaking urgently into an earpiece, his expression turning grim. He walked quickly toward Richard and lowered his voice. But Maya still caught 3 words that made her stomach tighten instantly. "The security cameras." The guard paused. They were disabled. The temperature inside the ballroom seemed to drop 10 degrees after the words left the guard's mouth. Disabled security cameras. Richard Whitmore's expression hardened instantly, the calm businessman disappearing behind something colder and sharper. "Since when?" he asked. "Approximately 8 minutes ago, sir," the guard answered quietly. The internal system rebooted unexpectedly. 8 minutes. Maya's stomach tightened harder. That was almost exactly when Evelyn Cross poured the champagne. Around the ballroom, wealthy investors and politicians exchanged nervous glances while hotel staff whispered anxiously near the walls. The glamorous atmosphere from earlier had completely vanished. Now the room felt trapped, heavy, like everyone suddenly realized they were standing too close to something dangerous. Richard loosened the cuff of his black suit jacket slowly, his movements controlled with almost unsettling precision. "Lock the exits," he said calmly. Several guests protested immediately. "Richard, this is insane. You cannot hold people here. I have a flight in 2 hours." But Richard ignored them. "Nobody leaves until we understand what happened tonight." Evelyn stepped closer beside him, her emerald dress catching the chandelier light like polished glass. "Richard, think carefully about this. Public panic would damage your company overnight." "My company can survive headlines," he replied without looking at her. "I am more concerned about surviving poisoning." Silence crashed down again. Maya noticed Evelyn's jaw tighten very slightly. Tiny things suddenly stood out to her now. The way Evelyn's fingers tapped once against her clutch purse. The way her eyes flickered toward the ballroom entrance before settling back into calm professionalism. Grace leaned closer to Maya and whispered softly, "Do not stare." Maya nodded, but she could not stop watching Evelyn Cross. Something about the woman felt wrong in the same way the champagne smelled wrong. Too smooth. Too controlled. Richard turned toward Maya again. "Walk with me." Maya blinked. "What?" "You noticed something every person in this room missed. That means I trust your instincts more than theirs right now." Several executives looked visibly uncomfortable hearing that. One wealthy donor muttered under his breath, "He is taking advice from a child." Richard heard him. "That child may have saved my life," he answered flatly. Nobody spoke after that. The crowd parted as Richard began walking toward a quieter hallway outside the ballroom, Maya and Grace following nervously while security guards moved ahead of them. The thick hotel carpet softened their footsteps. Warm golden wall lights reflected across polished wood panels and framed artwork worth more money than Maya could imagine. Richard walked with the same steady pace the entire time, but Maya noticed his right hand flex once near his side. Not fear exactly. Adrenaline. "How long have you worked these events?" he asked Grace without slowing down. "Almost 4 years," Grace answered carefully. Mostly overnight staffing and banquet support. And your daughter always notices details like this? Grace gave a tired little smile. Since she was little, Maya remembers things most people ignore. Richard glanced sideways at Maya briefly. That can be dangerous. Maya frowned slightly. Why? Because people become uncomfortable around someone who sees too much. The words sounded strangely personal. Before Maya could respond, one of the security guards stopped suddenly near the end of the hallway. Sir, he said quietly, you need to see this. A service cart sat abandoned. Beside the kitchen entrance, half-empty champagne bottles rested on top beside clean crystal glasses. At first everything looked normal. Then Maya saw it. One bottle near the back had a faint silver mark painted near the bottom. The exact same shimmer she noticed on Richard's glass. Her pulse jumped. That one, she whispered immediately. The guard carefully picked up the bottle using a cloth napkin while Richard's gray eyes narrowed dangerously. Check every bottle in this building, he ordered. Now. Then Maya noticed something else. Tiny wet footprints leading away from the cart toward a restricted hallway marked private access only. High heels. Still fresh. Evelyn Cross was no longer standing behind them. The restricted hallway smelled different from the ballroom. Gone were the perfumes and polished luxury. Back here the air carried industrial cleaner, hot electrical wiring, and faint steam drifting from the hotel kitchens below. Maya walked carefully beside her mother while Richard Whitmore's security team spread through the corridor ahead of them like silent shadows in dark suits. Somewhere farther down the hallway, a service elevator chimed softly. She could still be inside the building. One guard murmured into his earpiece. Richard said nothing. His face had become unreadable again, but Maya noticed the subtle change in him now. Earlier, he looked like a businessman hosting another expensive event. Now he looked alert in a completely different way. Focused. Dangerous. Like someone used to betrayal. They stopped outside a private conference suite near the end of the corridor. The heavy glass door stood slightly open. One security guard carefully pushed it wider while another checked inside first. Clear, he announced. Richard stepped into the room immediately. Maya followed more slowly, her sneakers silent against the dark carpet. The conference suite looked untouched at first glance. Long polished table. Wall screens glowing softly with stock market reports. Half-finished bottled water sitting beside digital tablets. But something felt wrong. Maya sensed it instantly. Nobody touch anything, Richard ordered quietly. His gray eyes scanned the room. With cold precision. Then he stopped near the head of the table. A single folder rested there beside an expensive silver pen. Richard opened it slowly. Maya watched his expression darken line by line as he read the documents inside. What is it? Grace asked carefully. Richard did not answer immediately. He simply handed the folder to his head of security. The older man flipped through the papers and swore under his breath. Transfer authorization forms, he muttered. Emergency executive succession. Maya frowned slightly. What does that mean? Richard finally looked at her. It means if something happened to me tonight, control of my company would immediately transfer to Evelyn Cross temporarily until the board approved permanent leadership. Grace's eyes widened. She planned this. Not alone, Richard answered quietly. Something this coordinated never happens alone. Maya stared at the glowing city skyline outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Rain had started falling over Chicago now, streaking silver lines down the glass 40 stories above the streets below. The entire city looked cold and distant from up here. Suddenly, one of the wall monitors flickered. Everyone turned instantly. Static rippled across the screen for half a second before security footage appeared. Hotel hallway cameras. Sir, a guard said sharply. The backup server just reconnected. The footage rolled silently across the monitor. Timestamped 12 minutes earlier. Maya stepped closer beside Richard as they watched Evelyn Cross appear near the service hallway carrying her emerald clutch purse. She paused beside the champagne cart, looked around once, then reached into her purse. Maya's heartbeat quickened. Even without audio, the movement felt wrong. Deliberate. Controlled. Evelyn tilted something small into one of the glasses before calmly walking away moments later. Nobody in the room spoke for several seconds after the footage ended. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Finally, Richard exhaled slowly through his nose. Not shocked. Not emotional. Just tired somehow. Deeply tired. I trusted her, he said quietly. Maya looked up at him. For the first time all night, the Billionaire standing beside her did not seem powerful. He just looked human. One of the guards stepped forward immediately. "We can alert the police now, sir." Richard nodded once. "Do it." But before the guard could move, every light in the conference room suddenly shut off at once. Darkness swallowed the room instantly. Somewhere down the hallway, alarms exploded into life. The darkness hit the room so fast it felt physical. 1 second Maya could see rain sliding down the massive windows and glowing stock numbers on the wall screens. The next second, everything vanished beneath black silence and screaming alarms. Somewhere in the hallway, people started shouting. "Backup power will engage in 30 seconds. A computerized voice announced through hidden speakers. The calm artificial tone somehow made everything feel worse. Maya instinctively grabbed her mother's hand. Grace squeezed back immediately. "Stay close," she whispered. Flashlights snapped on around the room as Richard Whitmore's security team reacted instantly. White beams cut through the darkness, illuminating fragments of frightened faces and polished furniture. Richard stood near the center of the conference room, his expression cold and focused beneath the flickering emergency lights. "Get everyone to the secure elevators," one guard said urgently. "Now." Another security officer spoke into his radio. "We lost communications with half the building." The alarms continued pulsing through the hotel floor like a giant mechanical heartbeat. Maya could hear distant footsteps echoing through the corridor outside. Running footsteps. Fast. Richard noticed them too. His eyes shifted toward the hallway entrance immediately. "That is her," Maya whispered before she could stop herself. Richard glanced at her once. Then he moved. Not recklessly. Not emotionally. Just fast. He stepped into the hallway with 2 guards close behind, while emergency red lights blinked overhead, staining the walls crimson every few seconds. Maya followed beside her mother before anyone could stop them. The restricted corridor looked completely different under emergency lighting. Longer. Colder. Shadows stretched strangely across the carpet while hotel guests farther away stumbled through confusion near the ballroom entrance. Somewhere below them, thunder rolled across Chicago. Then Maya saw her. Evelyn Cross disappeared around the far corner of the hallway, emerald dress flashing briefly beneath the red lights. "There!" Maya shouted. One guard sprinted forward immediately, while Richard kept walking with unnerving calm. Maya realized something then. He was not chasing Evelyn because he was angry. He was chasing her because he needed answers. They turned the corner sharply and entered a narrow service corridor lined with steel doors and maintenance carts. The elegant luxury of the hotel vanished back here completely. Pipes rattled overhead. Steam hissed softly through vents. The smell of rain and machinery filled the air. At the far end of the corridor, the service elevator doors were slowly closing. Evelyn stood inside. Her eyes locked onto Richard through the narrowing gap. For the first time all night, Maya saw fear on Evelyn Cross's face. Real fear. "Richard," Evelyn called sharply, "listen to me." The elevator doors slid closer together. Richard stopped walking. "You poisoned me," he said flatly. "No," Evelyn answered immediately. "I stopped someone worse." The sentence hit the hallway harder than the alarms. Richard's guards exchanged confused looks. Maya frowned. "Worse?" Before anyone could react, the elevator doors sealed shut completely and disappeared downward. Silence hung there for one strange second. Then every phone in the corridor buzzed simultaneously. Security guards looked down instantly. Richard pulled his phone from his jacket pocket slowly. Maya watched the color drain slightly from his face as he read whatever appeared on the screen. "Sir?" one guard asked carefully. Richard handed him the phone without a word. Maya caught a glimpse of the message reflected faintly across the dark screen. A live video feed. Someone sitting inside a black SUV in the hotel parking garage below, wearing a gray hooded jacket, smiling directly into the camera. Then the man spoke calmly into the recording. "Mr. Whitmore, if you are seeing this, your advisor failed. Which means phase 2 begins. Now." The man on the phone screen looked relaxed. That was the terrifying part. Rain streaked across the parking garage camera behind him while soft jazz music played somewhere inside the black SUV. He sat comfortably in the back seat like a businessman waiting for a meeting instead of someone threatening a billionaire. "You have spent years building systems that control hospitals, supply chains, and emergency infrastructure, Mr. Whitmore," the man continued calmly. Did you really think powerful people would allow one man to own that much influence forever? The video glitched slightly as thunder rolled outside the hotel. Maya watched Richard Whitmore's face carefully. He did not look surprised anymore. He looked like someone recognizing an old nightmare, finally stepping out of the shadows. Who is he? Maya whispered softly. One of the security guards answered quietly without taking his eyes off the screen. Daniel Mercer, former executive strategist for Whitmore Technologies. Maya frowned. Former. Richard fired him 2 years ago. Richard's jaw tightened faintly. After I discovered he was manipulating medical supply contracts during the pandemic. The guard looked grim. Mercer disappeared after the investigation. On the phone screen, Mercer smiled slightly, as if hearing the conversation somehow. You ruined my career over morality, he said calmly. That was your mistake. Men like you always believe principles matter more than survival. Behind Maya, the hotel alarms finally stopped. The silence afterward felt even heavier. Emergency lighting still painted the corridor deep red, while rain hammered against distant windows somewhere above them. This building has already been evacuated on the lower floors, Mercer continued. Police will arrive in exactly 12 minutes. Unfortunately for you, Richard, 12 minutes is enough time for financial markets to panic. One of the guards suddenly cursed under his breath while checking his phone. Sir, Whitmore stock just crashed 18%. Another guard looked pale. False reports are spreading online saying you collapsed during the gala. Mercer smiled wider on the screen. Amazing how quickly fear spreads in America now, faster than truth ever could. Richard finally spoke. What do you want? Control, Mercer answered instantly. Not revenge. Revenge is emotional. This is business. The SUV camera shifted slightly as Mercer leaned closer. Your advisor understood that eventually. Evelyn was supposed to make tonight quiet and simple. Then your little hero interfered. His eyes moved toward the camera as though staring directly at Maya through the screen. Maya suddenly felt cold. Do not worry, Mercer said softly. I am not angry with you, Maya Brooks. Actually, I am impressed. Most people stop paying attention long before they become dangerous. Grace instinctively pulled Maya slightly closer beside her. Richard noticed the movement immediately. You involve a child again, he said quietly. And this conversation changes. For the first time, a small crack appeared in Mercer's calm expression. Not fear. Irritation. Still pretending you are the protector, he replied. That is why you fail to understand the world, Richard. People are assets. Nothing more. Maya looked at Richard then. Something shifted in his face hearing those words. Tiny, but real. Because earlier that night, he had almost treated Maya and Grace exactly the same way everyone else in the ballroom did. Invisible. Disposable. Easy to overlook. The screen flickered once more. By the time police untangle this mess, Mercer continued, your investors will abandon you. Your board will remove you. And every news station in America will believe you staged tonight for sympathy. Richard folded his arms slowly. You sound very confident. Mercer smiled. I should be. You still have not realized where the real attack is happening. The video feed suddenly ended. Black screen. Silence. Then every phone in the corridor buzzed again at the exact same moment. One of the guards looked down first, and his expression immediately changed. Sir, he said carefully, there is a fire alert from the hotel kitchen level. Maya's stomach dropped instantly. Her mother worked the kitchen service corridors tonight. Grace Brooks did not wait for instructions. The moment the words kitchen level left the guard's mouth, she turned and started moving down the corridor fast enough that Maya nearly lost sight of her. Mom, Maya called, rushing after her. Richard Whitmore followed immediately behind them with 2 security guards while emergency lights continued pulsing red across the walls. The hotel felt completely different now. Not luxurious. Not glamorous. Just enormous and confusing, filled with frightened voices echoing through distant hallways. Service workers hurried past carrying radios and emergency kits, while guests crowded near elevator banks, demanding answers nobody could give. Somewhere overhead, sprinklers hissed faintly through the ventilation system. The fire suppression alarm triggered near the kitchen storage area. One guard reported while jogging beside Richard. No confirmation of an actual fire yet. Mercer wants chaos, Richard said quietly. Panic hides mistakes. Maya kept running beside her mother, lungs burning as they pushed through another heavy service door and entered the lower kitchen corridor. Heat hit them instantly. Industrial ovens. Steam. The sharp smell of bleach and smoke mixing together. Hotel workers clustered nervously near the far end of the hallway, while flashing emergency lights reflected across stainless steel counters. "Grace," a woman shouted. The storage doors locked automatically when the alarm started. Maya's stomach dropped. Grace moved faster. "Who is still inside?" "2 prep cooks and 1 dishwasher." The woman answered breathlessly. "We think maybe more." One of the managers looked pale with panic. The electronic locks stopped responding. Richard stepped forward immediately. Maintenance override. Offline with the system crash. The thick metal storage doors stood sealed at the end of the corridor. Faint banging sounds echoed from inside. Maya felt cold despite the kitchen heat. Richard studied the locked doors for 1 second before turning to his guards. "Get me something heavy enough to force them open." "Sir, the emergency response team is already coming. People are trapped now." The guard hesitated only briefly before moving. Maya watched Richard carefully again. Earlier tonight, he looked untouchable. $1 billion suit. Perfect composure. But standing in the overheated kitchen surrounded by frightened workers, he no longer felt distant. He looked angry now. Not about money. About people. Grace knelt beside the electronic lock panel while sweat dampened loose strands of hair against her forehead. "The backup battery is still active," she muttered. "If I can reset the internal latch manually." Maya recognized that tone immediately. Her mother used it in emergency rooms when seconds mattered more than fear. Richard crouched beside her without hesitation despite his expensive suit pressing against the dirty tile floor. "Tell me what you need." Grace blinked at him once, surprised. "There should be a manual release behind this panel, but I need a narrow screwdriver." Richard removed a silver pen from his jacket pocket and handed it to her instantly. "Will this work?" Grace gave the smallest nod. "Maybe." Maya noticed several hotel workers staring at Richard in disbelief. Billionaires were not supposed to kneel on kitchen floors helping support staff during emergencies. They were supposed to leave through private exits surrounded by security. Richard ignored the looks completely. The banging behind the doors grew louder now. Someone inside shouted for help. Grace worked quickly with shaking hands while Maya held a flashlight steady beside her. "Come on," Maya whispered softly. "Come on." Then the hallway lights flickered once, twice, and suddenly every screen inside the kitchen turned on at the exact same moment. Television monitors, digital menu boards, security tablets. Daniel Mercer's face appeared across all of them, smiling calmly. "You still do not understand, Richard," he said softly through dozens of speakers. "This was never about killing you." Richard slowly stood to his feet. Mercer's smile widened slightly. "It was about showing the world exactly which lives you choose to save first." The kitchen monitors flickered with Daniel Mercer's smiling face, while steam curled through the overheated corridor and frightened hotel workers stood frozen beneath the flashing emergency lights. "You built your image on compassion, Richard," Mercer continued calmly. "Through the speakers, hospitals, scholarships, emergency housing grants. The generous billionaire saving ordinary people. But tonight, everyone will finally see the truth." Richard Whitmore stared at the screens without blinking. "And what truth is that?" Mercer leaned back comfortably inside the video feed. "That when pressure arrives, powerful men always protect themselves first." Behind the sealed storage doors, somebody pounded desperately again. Maya flinched at the sound. Grace still worked frantically beside the electronic lock panel, using Richard's silver pen while sweat rolled down her temple. "Almost there," she muttered. Mercer smiled wider across the monitors. "Look around you, Richard. Investors upstairs are panicking. Your stock value is collapsing by the minute. News stations already believe you staged a poisoning attempt to manipulate the market. And where are you?" His voice sharpened slightly. "Hiding in a kitchen." Several hotel workers lowered their eyes, awkwardly hearing that. Maya noticed it immediately. People like Mercer always said words designed to make ordinary workers feel small. Like kitchens and maintenance hallways somehow mattered less than ballrooms upstairs. Richard noticed it too. "Interesting," he said quietly. "You still think this place is beneath me?" Mercer laughed softly. "Is it not?" Richard glanced around the overheated kitchen corridor. Stainless steel counters. Tired workers in stained uniforms. Emergency lights reflecting off wet tile floors. Grace kneeling beside a broken lock with shaking hands while Maya held the flashlight steady beside her. Then Richard answered calmly. This building stops functioning without these people. The kitchen grew very quiet after that. Maya looked up at him differently now. Not because he sounded impressive, because he sounded sincere. Mercer's smile faded slightly for the first time. Sentimentality, he muttered. That is your weakness. No, Maya whispered before realizing she had spoken aloud. Everyone looked at her. Even Mercer paused on the monitors. Maya swallowed nervously, but kept talking anyway. You think people only matter if they are useful to you. Mercer studied her silently through the screens. And you think kindness changes the world? Maya looked at her mother first before answering. Grace's hands were still working the lock panel carefully despite exhaustion, pulling at every movement. I think people remember who showed up when things got hard. For one strange second, nobody spoke. The kitchen alarms hummed softly overhead, while rain rattled faintly through distant vents. Then a sharp metallic click echoed from the locked storage doors. Grace exhaled hard. Got it. The electronic latch released. Workers quickly pulled the heavy doors open, while trapped staff stumbled out, coughing lightly from smoke drifting through the storage area. Maya immediately counted faces. 1, 2, 3, 4. Relief hit her chest so fast it almost hurt. Richard helped steady one older dishwasher whose knees nearly gave out from panic. Easy, he said quietly. You are okay. The man stared at him in disbelief. Probably because billionaires were not supposed to hold on to frightened kitchen workers while kneeling on wet tile floors. On the monitors, Mercer watched the scene silently. His expression had changed now. Not angry. Confused. As if Richard Whitmore had broken some invisible rule rich people were supposed to follow. Then one of the security guards suddenly pressed a hand to his earpiece. Sir, he said urgently. Police just arrived at the hotel. Mercer sighed softly on the screens. Looks like our time is ending. Richard stepped closer toward the monitors. You lost tonight. But Mercer shook his head slowly. No, Richard. Tonight was never about winning. His eyes shifted briefly toward Maya. It was about proving that one unnoticed person can change everything. The video feed abruptly cut to black. Silence settled across the kitchen corridor again. Then Maya noticed something strange near the service entrance. A single emerald green high heel sitting abandoned beside the doorway. Evelyn Cross had been there listening the entire time. The abandoned emerald heel sat near the service entrance like a silent confession. Rainwater glistened around it in thin silver streaks where somebody had rushed through the corridor moments earlier. Maya stared at it while the kitchen workers slowly caught their breath behind her. She was here, Maya whispered. Richard Whitmore picked up the shoe carefully. His expression remained controlled, but Maya noticed the faint tightening around his eyes again. Betrayal still hurt no matter how rich someone became. One of the security guards stepped closer. Police are sweeping the upper floors now, sir. They found Mercer's SUV abandoned in the parking garage. Richard nodded once. And Evelyn? The guard hesitated. No sign of her yet. The kitchen had finally grown quieter. Emergency alarms were shutting down one by one while exhausted workers leaned against counters drinking water with trembling hands. Outside the narrow service windows, Chicago's rainstorm painted blurry lights across the city skyline. Maya suddenly realized how tired she felt. Everything had happened so fast that her body was only now catching up with the fear. Grace noticed immediately. Come sit down for a minute, she said softly. Maya nodded and lowered herself onto an overturned supply crate near the wall. Richard remained standing nearby, speaking quietly with security and hotel management, but Maya noticed something strange. He kept glancing toward the kitchen staff. Not the executives upstairs. Not the police officers arriving outside. The workers. The people Mercer believed did not matter. A middle-aged prep cook approached Richard nervously holding a damp kitchen towel in his hands. Sir, the man said quietly. Thank you for coming down here yourself. Richard looked genuinely confused for a second. Why would I not? The man gave a tired little shrug. Most people with money like yours would have left through a private exit. Richard stared at him silently for a moment before answering. Then most people with money like mine are fools. Maya looked down at the floor after hearing that, because suddenly her eyes burned unexpectedly. She did not fully understand why. Maybe because she had spent her entire life watching powerful people walk past workers without learning their names. But tonight Richard Whitmore stayed. One of the police officers entered the kitchen corridor. Moments later, tall, gray-haired, rain still dripping from his coat. "Mr. Whitmore," he said calmly, "we have a situation upstairs." Richard's expression sharpened immediately. "Mercer?" "No." The officer glanced briefly toward Maya and Grace first. "It is Evelyn Cross." Maya stood up instantly. "Did you catch her?" The officer shook his head slowly. "She surrendered herself in the main ballroom." Silence settled heavily again. Richard frowned slightly. "That does not make sense." "No," the officer admitted. "It does not." The rain outside intensified harder against the windows. Somewhere deeper inside the hotel, elevators hummed back to life as emergency systems rebooted. Richard looked toward Maya unexpectedly. "You noticed details everyone else missed tonight. What do you think?" Maya blinked, surprised he was asking her seriously. She thought carefully. Evelyn's fear inside the elevator. Mercer's message. The abandoned shoe. Then slowly, Maya said the words forming in her chest since the service hallway. "I do not think she wanted you dead." Richard stared at her. "Why?" Maya swallowed softly. "Because if she did, you would have already drank the champagne before she ever let me see it." The kitchen fell completely still after that. Even the police officer looked thoughtful now. Richard's face changed slightly. Not shock. Realization. "She wanted to stop Mercer," he murmured quietly. "But she could not expose him directly." Maya nodded slowly. "So she made sure somebody else would." For several long seconds, Richard Whitmore simply stood there listening to the rain and the distant hum of the waking hotel around them. Then he exhaled quietly through his nose. "Bring Evelyn to the conference floor," he told the officer. "I want to hear everything." But before anyone could move, every television inside the kitchen suddenly switched back on again by themselves. Daniel Mercer's face reappeared, smiling calmly through the static. "Careful, Richard," he said softly. "You are finally getting close to the truth. And the truth is the one thing your company was never built to survive." Daniel Mercer's face flickered across the kitchen monitors through waves of static, while rain hammered against the hotel windows hard enough to sound like gravel. "Your company was built on trust," he continued softly. "That is the funny thing about trust, Richard. Once people begin questioning it, everything collapses faster than anyone expects." Richard Whitmore stared at the screens without reacting. But Maya noticed his hands now. Earlier they stayed perfectly still no matter what happened. Now one finger tapped once against his sleeve. Tiny movement. Tiny crack in control. "You manipulated financial markets tonight," the police officer said sharply toward the screens. "You threatened civilians. This ends badly for you." Mercer smiled faintly. "Officer, by tomorrow morning nobody will remember me. They will remember Richard Whitmore standing in a luxury hotel while his company's stock collapsed and emergency systems failed around him." The kitchen workers exchanged nervous looks hearing that. Phones buzzed constantly now with news alerts and social media updates. Maya caught fragments while people whispered around her. Whitmore scandal. Poisoning hoax. Corporate fraud investigation. Public trust collapsing. Lies spread so fast online they almost sounded true simply because so many people repeated them at once. Richard finally spoke quietly. "What truth are you trying to expose?" Mercer's smile disappeared completely. "The truth that your company does not save people because it cares. It saves people because compassion became profitable." Silence settled heavily across the kitchen. Maya looked toward Richard carefully. He did not answer immediately. Somewhere nearby, industrial refrigerators hummed softly while exhausted workers leaned against steel counters listening. Finally, Richard said something Maya did not expect. "You are partly right." Several people looked shocked hearing that. Even Mercer paused slightly on the monitors. Richard loosened his suit jacket slowly and leaned one hand against the stainless steel counter beside him. Suddenly, he looked older than before. Not weak, just tired in a deep human way. "When I started Whitmore Technologies," he said quietly, "I told myself profit and helping people could exist together." Rain rolled down the windows behind him in silver rivers. Then investors arrived. Boards. Expansion. Shareholders. He gave a humorless little smile. Eventually, every meeting became about percentages instead of patience. Maya listened carefully. Nobody in the kitchen moved now. "You know what scared me most tonight?" Richard continued softly. "Not the poison. Not losing money. It was realizing a 13-year-old girl noticed suffering faster than I did." Maya felt heat rise into her face immediately. Mercer's expression hardened again. Do not pretend humility now. You still built the machine. Yes, Richard answered. I did. The honesty of it landed harder than shouting would have. Mercer stared silently through the monitors for several long seconds before speaking again. Then maybe you finally understand why this had to happen. Suddenly, one of the security guards stepped quickly into the kitchen corridor, holding a tablet computer. Sir, he said urgently, we found something on Mercer's abandoned server. Richard looked up immediately. The guard swallowed once before continuing. Medical supply contracts. Emergency housing projects. Disaster relief funding. He hesitated. Someone inside Whitmore Technologies has been quietly rerouting money away from low-income neighborhoods for years. Maya's stomach tightened. Grace closed her eyes briefly beside her like she already knew exactly which neighborhoods lost that support. Neighborhoods like theirs. Richard slowly took the tablet from the guard. Maya watched his face as he scrolled through the files. Every few seconds his jaw tightened harder. Who approved these transfers? He asked quietly. The guard looked uncomfortable. According to the records, your executive board did. Mercer leaned closer through the monitors. Now you finally see it. Your empire was already poisoning people long before tonight. Richard stared down at the glowing screen silently. Maya realized something painful then. Mercer was dangerous, manipulative, cruel even. But buried inside all his chaos was one terrible truth Richard could not ignore anymore. Then the kitchen lights flickered once more. The monitors glitched violently. Mercer looked suddenly alarmed for the first time all night. What did you do? He snapped sharply. A calm female voice answered from somewhere off-screen near him. I got tired of helping cowards hide. Evelyn Cross stepped slowly into Mercer's video frame, holding a flash drive in one hand. The kitchen monitors crackled violently as Evelyn Cross stepped fully into Daniel Mercer's video frame, rainwater glistening across her hair and barefoot while she held the flash drive tightly in one hand. Mercer spun toward her in visible disbelief. You were supposed to disappear, he snapped. Evelyn laughed once, but there was no humor inside it. Only exhaustion. You really still think this was about money? Maya watched every face inside the kitchen carefully now. Richard Whitmore stood motionless near the steel counter while the exhausted workers around him stared at the screens like witnesses to something much bigger than corporate sabotage. Evelyn looked directly into the camera. I worked beside Richard for 8 years, she said quietly. Do you know what Mercer never understood? She held up the flash drive slightly. Richard built a machine that lost its soul. Mercer wanted to burn the machine down completely. Mercer's calm composure finally cracked. Do not make yourself sound noble now. You helped me. Evelyn's eyes hardened instantly. I helped expose corruption. I did not agree to innocent people getting hurt. Richard finally spoke. The champagne. Evelyn lowered her gaze briefly before answering. The dose was never lethal. Several people in the kitchen exhaled sharply at once. Maya felt her chest loosen slightly for the first time all night. I needed the test to trigger publicly, Evelyn continued. Mercer wanted silent panic. I needed visible chaos so people would start looking closer. Richard stared at her through the monitors silently. You could have come to me. Evelyn gave him a tired smile that somehow looked sadder than anger. Would you have listened? The question hung heavily inside the kitchen corridor. Richard did not answer immediately because deep down he already knew the truth. Before tonight, he probably would have dismissed concerns, delegated investigations, trusted board members, and moved on to the next billion-dollar meeting. Maya realized Evelyn knew that too. Mercer suddenly lunged toward the camera from off-screen, his face twisted with frustration. You idiot, he hissed. You ruined everything. But Evelyn calmly inserted the flash drive into a nearby laptop. No, she answered softly. I finally fixed my mistake. One of the security guards stepped closer to the monitors. Sir, incoming data transfer. Screens across the kitchen instantly flooded with files. Financial records. Board communications. Internal memos. Years of hidden transactions rerouting medical funding away from struggling neighborhoods into luxury development projects and executive bonuses. Grace Brooks stared at the files with quiet horror. These were the clinics that closed near South Side, she whispered. Another worker pointed toward the screens. That shelter program too. Maya looked at Richard carefully. He did not look defensive anymore. He looked devastated. Not because Mercer exposed corruption, because for the first time he was truly seeing the damage hidden beneath his own company's success. Rain hammered harder outside, while police radios crackled somewhere deeper in the hotel. Evelyn looked directly toward Richard again through the monitors. You once told me Whitmore Technologies existed to help people who were overlooked. Her voice softened slightly. Then you stopped noticing who was being left behind. Maya felt those words hit Richard harder than every threat Mercer made all night. Because they were true. Mercer suddenly grabbed the laptop camera violently from somewhere off-screen, his face filling the monitors again. You think this changes anything? He shouted. People like him always survive. Rich men apologize. Stock prices recover. Nothing changes. Maya surprised herself by stepping closer toward the screens. You are wrong, she said quietly. Mercer froze slightly, hearing her voice again. Maya swallowed once before continuing. Things change when somebody finally pays attention. Silence followed. Real silence. Not fear this time. Reflection. Behind Maya, kitchen workers, police, officers, hotel staff, and security guards all stood listening beneath the fading emergency lights. Ordinary people. The same people Mercer thought nobody noticed until they became useful. Richard Whitmore slowly looked around the kitchen corridor one final time before speaking softly. Tomorrow morning, he said, every board member involved resigns. Mercer scoffed bitterly through the monitors. And after that, Richard's gray eyes shifted toward Maya and Grace. After that, he answered quietly, I start rebuilding the company for the people we ignored first. By sunrise, the storm over Chicago had finally begun to fade. Pale gold lights spilled across rain-soaked streets while news helicopters circled above the luxury hotel like restless birds searching for the next disaster. Inside the ballroom, the chandeliers still glowed softly over abandoned champagne glasses and half-eaten desserts left behind by guests who fled hours earlier. Everything looked strangely smaller in the morning light. Less magical, more human. Maya Brooks stood near the massive windows wearing the same oversized catering uniform from the night before, though now it smelled faintly of smoke and industrial cleaner from the kitchen corridors below. Her mother sat nearby wrapped in a hotel blanket, drinking coffee slowly with exhausted hands. Neither of them had slept. Across the ballroom, police officers moved quietly between tables collecting statements while television crews waited outside the secured entrances. Every screen in America was talking about Whitmore Technologies, corruption investigations, emergency funding theft, executive resignations. But Maya noticed something strange. For the first time, reporters were also talking about hospital workers, kitchen staff, and low-income neighborhoods that had been ignored for years. Ordinary people were finally part of the story. Richard Whitmore stood alone near the stage, staring at the city skyline through the towering glass windows. His tie was gone. His suit jacket hung over one shoulder. Without the cameras and executives surrounding him, he no longer looked untouchable. He just looked tired. Human. Maya watched him quietly for a moment before walking closer. Richard noticed her immediately. You should be home sleeping, he said softly. Maya shrugged slightly. You should too. A small smile touched his face for the first time all night. Real this time. Not the polished smile billionaires practiced for interviews. Fair point. For a few seconds, they simply stood there together watching sunlight spread slowly across the city below. Chicago looked peaceful from 40 stories up, like none of the chaos overnight had happened at all. Then Richard reached into his pocket and carefully removed a folded piece of paper. I spent 3 hours writing resignation letters for my executive board, he said quietly, and another 2 reading reports I should have paid attention to years ago. Maya looked down at the paper in his hands. Are you really going to change things? Richard exhaled slowly. I do not know if I can fix everything. His gray eyes drifted toward the ballroom behind them, where kitchen workers and hotel staff quietly cleaned broken glass from the marble floors. But I know I cannot pretend not to see it anymore. Maya nodded softly because somehow that answer felt more honest than promises ever could. Richard glanced toward Grace, sitting nearby. Your mother saved people her entire life without headlines or stock prices attached to it. He looked back at Maya. Last night you reminded me that noticing people matters more than impressing them. Maya felt embarrassed hearing that and stared down at her worn sneakers. I just smelled something weird. Richard laughed quietly under his breath. No, you paid attention when everyone else stopped. Outside the ballroom windows, the first clear sunlight finally broke through the clouds completely, turning the wet streets below into rivers of gold. Richard slowly picked up a fresh glass of water resting nearby on a catering tray. Then, without ceremony or cameras watching, he handed it carefully to Maya first. "After last night," he said softly, "I think you should drink before I do." Maya stared at the glass for a second before taking it with a small smile. Around them, workers continued cleaning the ballroom while police officers packed away evidence cases and morning light washed across the city. Quiet, ordinary, human, and somewhere deep inside the fading echoes of the storm, Richard Whitmore finally understood something no boardroom had ever taught him. Empires survived on money, but people survived on whether somebody cared enough to notice when something was wrong.